Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. Today, we are connecting with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, is here, and it's great to have you back.
Hi, Tammy. Thanks for having us.
Of course.
And our guest today is Henry Sobanet, and I've known Henry, I guess, in a peripheral manner for a number of years. He's one of the good guys for the state of Colorado that keeps the ship going, and I'm serious when we talk about what he does and what the issues are and how they're addressed. I think you'll appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Henry.
My pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
So you have a fairly distinctive background in the sense that you've had this job as a deputy director and a director for quite a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what your office does?
Thanks. I'm the director of the Office of State Planning and Budgeting. My first job in the office was with Governor Owens. I was the deputy budget director for 5 years and a few months, and then the director at that time in late 2004 took a new job, Nancy McAllen,
right.
And somehow, I don't understand exactly how the process worked, but I applied to replace her, and Governor Owens selected me. So I was the budget director for the last 2.5 years or so of his administration. And then I had a consulting company after he was term limited out. We did policy work, we did economic studies, I worked on a couple ballot campaigns, I did research for different business sectors. And then Governor-elect John Hickenlooper invited me to come back and head up his Office of State Planning and Budgeting in late 2010.
So really just to string this all together, except for the 4 years in between those two administrations, you really have been on the job, so to speak, for about 18 years.
I've seen a lot of ups and downs in the economy and been at the budget office for most of it, yeah.
What does the budget office do?
Well, we do a few things. We have an economic section. We forecast economic statistics, and every quarter you can go on our website, colorado.gov/OSPB, and there's a quarterly update of state revenue, national economic trends, Colorado economic trends, and that's a statutory duty that we have. The legislature publishes a similar document every quarter, and in that way, the legislative branch and the executive branch have kind of two independent looks at how things are going and then how much money to expect from the different revenue sources.
Right.
We have a budgeting section. We have several budget analysts, and their assignments are to work with the departments to prepare the budget request for the governor. We analyze bills to create advice for the governor on what to sign. Lately, we've been involved in some really exciting things for the policy world. Evidence-based policy research and evaluation, so trying to understand, are we doing programs to the best fidelity of research? What are we getting in terms of cost avoided or dollars saved from different programs? When you think about this, think about drug treatment or different interventions like that. Which ones work, which ones don't? And also now performance management. So we've had resources where we teach people in the government about lean process improvement, the Toyota production system, how to take steps out of the process, eliminate waste, think about the customer, things like that. That's been very exciting, and we've sponsored an academy for senior leaders in state government. The big picture there is we're a $30 billion operation. If you put us in the Fortune list of corporations, we'd be about 120 or 130 maybe.
Right.
All of those companies hire with a direct strategy. They have internal management training, and it's all consistent, and it's expected to keep upgrading your human capital. State of Colorado is behind, and so coming back to state government, this was something I really wanted to try and pursue, and had a lot of support from the governor and the legislature now for these projects, and it's been a pretty exciting role for the budget office to get into.
Well, it sounds to me like a little bit of the business practice and business world is getting into government. People don't think about it that way, But in Colorado, it's true.
It's true here, and it's an imperative. The resources are tight. The public is skeptical, but we're still obligated to provide good services. So we have to look to business for the strategies that can make us more efficient.
It's probably a benefit or a curse depending upon which particular issue or which sacred cow that you're looking at. But Colorado does have a balanced budget requirement, doesn't it?
We have a balanced budget requirement in the Constitution. We also are trying to improve our reserve posture in the general fund. We're in a pretty big upswing now, the last 4 or 5 years, coming out of the Great Recession. And so at the bottom of the Great Recession, the state got down to a 2% reserve. And in this budget request, we're recommending 7% of the budget. There's a Moody's report out there for all the states, and they did some shock, scenarios. What should you be ready for? And their recommendation was 15.5%. So it's going to take a long time to get there, if ever, but one step at a time.
I'm just curious. 15.5% sounds like a good number, but from 2%, that's pretty hard to get to.
Really hard to get to, and it was hard to get to 6.5% where we are right now.
Right. Can you imagine if the federal government had a balanced budget requirement in its constitution?
Things would play out a little differently, I think.
And who else has input? There are many more people aside from you. I think you have a chief economist and various analysts.
I rely on our team a lot for getting all this work done so that we can have the right amount of time and quality to give the governor and the lieutenant governor and the chief of staff the right advice. I have an internal team, at OSPB, and then down the hall, the executive suite, deputy chiefs of staff, legislative director, policy people, lieutenant governor, governor, so forth.
Well, very good. We'll talk about some specific things, some of the exciting things that happened in 2017 when we come back in our next segment.
Thank you, Peter Moore. Peter Moore is the chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, and we are connecting with Vital today. And we're also talking with Henry Sobanet, director of the Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting, or are we calling that the Colorado Energy Office now?
No, Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting, and then there's another office called the Colorado Energy Office.
Okay, so there's more.
Yep.
All right, we will be back with more. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. We will have more coming up after this break. Thanks so much for staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. And we are connecting with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, is here. And Peter, we thank you so much for bringing on so many great guests and talking about the importance of the energy economy here in Colorado.
Really start off with just a real quick advertisement for those that don't know. Vital for Colorado is a coalition. I think we now have 74,000 citizens that have signed our pledge, over 1,000 businesses, I think a few hundred public officials from all different areas, and we try to educate and advocate and try to improve public discussion on rational energy policy. And a big part of that, so I'm very happy to have our guest, Henry Sobanet, who's director of the Budget Office for Colorado. We'll be talking budget and some good things that have really happened this year. But before we do that, just sort of step back a little bit. There's an expression that you ought to worry about what you can control and what you can't, and don't worry about what you can't control. And that's probably not really true in your job. You probably worry about it all.
Right.
But let's talk about things that, by category, the state of Colorado is essentially mandated to spend money for, in my language, not yours, I would put that in the category of must spends.
Right. That's a great question. For the listeners to understand, the best way to think about the state budget is it's a rules-based system. If you're searching for logic and why doesn't this make any sense, you're in the wrong place. A lot of the rules are in the Constitution, and a lot of them arrived in an uncoordinated way.
Right.
We have a rule that governs property taxes from 1982. We have a rule that governs overall tax policy and state spending, Tabor, from 1992. And then in 2000, the voters put a mandate for K-12 education spending called Amendment 23 into the Constitution. In the general fund, our biggest budget is supporting K through 12 education. And what we fill in what isn't generated by local property taxes. The 1982 law on property taxes tends to reduce property taxes. So it's shifted a lot of the burden for K-12 education to the state. The Medicaid program is a big part of the general fund budget, and it's an entitlement program if you qualify through income, disability, or age. But low income is the common denominator there. We have to take care of you. The Great Recession really drove a lot of people into the Medicaid program. And the expansion of Medicaid wasn't general funded. It was funded with this thing on the side called the hospital provider fee. So expanding Medicaid didn't necessarily crowd out the general fund. It was more the impact of the recession. The individual mandate, people having to go to the exchange did bring some more people into the program. But mostly that was an economic factor. And now aging population is growing. Over 65 is projected to grow substantially over the next few years. And in the Medicaid program, if you run out of money and need to be in a nursing home, it's not Medicare that takes care of you. Those are the doctor visits and the hospital costs. Long-term care is a state responsibility. And so this isn't just a Colorado issue, this is a national issue.
So by virtue of those uncoordinated rules that have fallen upon us, education is a must spend, especially K through 12.
Yep.
Clearly the Medicaid application is a must spend. And I seem to recall that prisons, by virtue of many of our social policies the last 20 years, are a must spend.
Yep.
So what's left over?
Well, after 60% between Medicaid and K through 12, public safety and courts, if you lump them together, the judicial branch is about 13%. Human services is something that doesn't get a lot of attention because a lot of it's delivered by a county. But at the state level, it's the Mental Health Institute, it's the Division of Youth Corrections. And typically you only hear about it if something goes really badly.
Right.
And so the quote-unquote optional stuff is support for higher education. There's about 160,000 resident undergraduate students in state schools, and we support buying down their tuition through the general fund, either through directly giving this thing called the College Opportunity Fund stipend,
right,
or financial aid to students. And over the years, that's been the pie slice that's taken the hit when we've had downturns or mandatory increases in other areas.
Well, just because I sometimes try to think of myself as an advocate, I view the K through 12 rule in particular as cannibalizing higher education, the land-grant universities, and the basic promise to the students and citizens of Colorado to be able to go to college. And it's not being taken away grossly, but the expenses are going up and up and up, and the universities, I don't know what the number is, and you may, but my memory is that the current subsidy for CU is perhaps 5% or less.
Yeah, it's really dropped. 25 years ago, the state would pick up about 2/3 of the cost of a college education.
Is it close to 5%?
And now your number about CU is correct. CU, that's also a function of CU has a lot of other activities, and they get a lot of grants, and it's a big operation. But the ability to support low tuition between correctional policy, more people qualifying for Medicaid, local share property taxes not keeping up, all of these things have conspired towards the tuition issue. A lot of debate right now over why can't the general fund support more transportation investment, and these are the reasons. 2 recessions in a decade, mandated spending in much of the budget. Public safety doesn't have a constitutional requirement, but boy, the average citizen, if you ask them what they want from their government, I think, enforce the laws and keep us safe is pretty high on the list.
I think I put that in the category of must spend, yes, even though it's a must for a different reason. Mm-hmm. So if you put all the must spends together, what's left over roughly? And I know it changes from year to year. It really depends upon whether you're having good economy or bad economy, and we might only have last year's figures available at this point.
In the general fund, everybody's different, has a different definition of must, but I'd say 15, 18% is in the categories that aren't those things that we've just talked about.
So that, to me, is a very, very significant thing for people to think about when they think about the state budget, is that let's use the 80-20 rule as a slightly different version of that as your pie chart. There's probably 80% that you really have to spend, 20% is discretionary, and then these rules that we talked about that created part of the 80%, especially the education part, have continuing pressure and can erode things such as higher education and through land-grant universities and CU.
Yep.
And the ability of kids to go to school. So that's a problem. But something good happened this year. What happened this year?
Well, we had Colorado has an interesting set of budget rules, as we just talked about. And we had this thing called the hospital provider fee being counted towards the overall revenue cap under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
Yeah, it's really just pass-through, right?
Yeah, the hospitals pay us the money, we match it, it gets matched with federal funds, and then we distribute it back out either to pay for the expanded Medicaid or to pay for enhanced payments to providers. When it was established in 2009, it was kind of put inside the Tabor framework. There was a way to have not done that back then, but it didn't happen.
Probably a private enterprise or something?
An enterprise.
Yeah.
And so it took a few sessions for people to understand the dynamic. Basically what was happening is the hospital money comes in, but we were having to pay a rebate out of the general fund where the hospital money wasn't. So K-12, higher education, healthcare, corrections had to come up with a rebate for the liability of the hospital fee. And the rules of the hospital fee weren't allowed to be, you can't use that money for the rebate, is the bottom line. So we had kind of a big bill last session, Senate Bill 267, that started the fee over into this enterprise fund. And we've carved up some money over the next 4 years that we'll be allocating to transportation. It's called certificates of participation. It's a way of bonding within the rules of COPs. And so COP financing will be used to add about 1.8 billion of transportation spending over the next 4 years. And that COP payment will be 100 million from the general fund and 50 million from the Department of Transportation's budget. But basically what this did is it allows to keep the money we already have from existing taxes, the growing economy. And so with that, we're able to pay the bills and the normal expenses that we expect to have. Also the mandated formulas, growth in education and growth in student population and inflation in K through 12, keeping up with the Medicaid population. It's slowing down, but still growing. And we're doing a big increase to higher education, to your earlier point this year, keeping tuition low, probably around an average of 3% tuition growth.
Well, that's good. I'm a lucky guy in the sense I have 3 kids in college right now. And I hear
congratulations.
3%. That's something I like that.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that this kind of complicated stuff, but it's a real good cautionary tale, I think, of unintended consequences. I am sure that the people that originally came up with the hospital provider fee didn't realize that these other shoes would drop down the road. There
was some awareness of it, but it was a problem that was a big hill to climb at the time for those decision makers. And for a variety of reasons, it just didn't happen. But that's in the past. It is what it is, and we found a way forward on a bipartisan basis last session. And now people can debate what to do with what's being generated by the economy in terms of taxes.
That's a good perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more Connect and Collaborate as we connect with Vital for Colorado with Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO, and we're talking with Henry Sobanet, Director of the Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting. We'll be back with much more discussion if you stay with us right after this break. Thanks so much for staying with us today on Connect and Collaborate as we're connecting with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, is leading the conversation.
Well, thanks a lot. We're lucky enough to have Henry Sobanet as the Director of the Office of State Planning and Budgeting. And I have a sense, Yeah, so we set the budget at my house. My wife just sort of tells me what it is. Is it more complicated at the state level?
Well, thanks again for the warm welcome. It's way more complicated. So we have 3 branches of government. They all have a point of view. So
Yeah.
the budget request starts the process off. We just did that November 1st. Now it's the Joint Budget Committee's turn. There are 3 members from each chamber on the Budget Committee, and it's relative to the composition of political power. So right now, it's majority Republicans in the Senate. So there's 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat from the
Right.
Senate, and there's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican from the House of Representatives. And they work. They have a dedicated staff just for them, and they start hearings in the next week or so, evaluating the budget request, reviewing the internal research their team has done over the summertime. And they hold hearings and briefings where the department heads come in, the staff go in, their staff tell them what they think of everything, and then they introduce a budget bill that reflects the compromise of how to allocate money for the next year. So then there, and the little catchphrase around the Capitol to pass a bill is 18 votes in the Senate, 33 votes in the House, and 1, meaning the governor's signature.
Right.
So that committee ends up being where the art of compromise and the wrestling and the arm twisting and the all the ups and downs of the political drama kind of work through that committee. And they prepare the budget bill, they bring it back to their colleagues critique it, try to make changes, and then it follows the normal process of a bill: committee structure, floor debate, goes over, and then conference committee and so forth.
So you've seen this dance, so to speak, occur at least for 17 years on and off. Do you think the idea of a split legislature is obviously challenging, but is it beneficial from a budget director's point of view?
Well, notwithstanding the global kind of political dynamic that we have, Colorado has a beautiful tradition of shaking hands on the budget, regardless of how the power structure has been. There's somehow this Colorado way that underpins everybody's work ethic and final destination. So yes, there are some tough fights on the budget, and certainly as you get to the last dollars, it can feel kind of stressful. But the tale of the tape looking backwards is that there's an agreement. It serves the greater good. The idea that everyone has to walk away happy is not really the test. It's, did everybody work together to do something where they can walk out of the building and explain what happened to their constituents? So we've seen it with single party control, and we've seen it with
Right.
split party control. What's been nice about my latest tenure is that even when we had Democratic control of both chambers, we still had pretty solidly bipartisan budgets. And I think that's kind of the proof point of the idea I was just talking about. People work together in the state, and it's in the culture.
Well, if you have to have a balanced budget, you have to walk out of the room with an agreement.
That helps.
And you can't kick the can down the road.
No.
So this is now old news, but I'm thinking of new sources of revenue that the state of Colorado has had, and I don't know if it's been 4 years or 5 years, but Proposition 64, marijuana.
Yeah.
I don't even know how large it is. It's probably in the billions in terms of gross sales, maybe in the tens of millions or even $100 million at the state level. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. So we're seeing a little over $1 billion maybe in retail sales.
Okay.
Depending on which month and how you annualize it. And the tax revenue has started to increase. Projected from all the different sales taxes on marijuana in the fiscal year that we're in now, we're expecting about $281 million.
And where does that go? Is it part of the deal or part of the vote I seem to remember?
Yeah, so the voters approved an excise tax. So like there's a wholesale tax on marijuana, and then there's a retail sales tax on top of it. The excise tax goes to support school construction. And, in the casual discussion of it, I think a lot of people thought it was for the regular operations of school.
Sure.
And so that's been a source of some confusion in the world. So the school construction fund gets its share of the excise tax, and then the spillover we put into a trust fund for public education. Well, the retail sales tax we've tried to really contain to the impact of different issues in the state, drug treatment, education, and things of that nature. Programs for kids. The advertising that you see is funded with the sales tax. The enforcement of the program is mostly from the business fees that the businesses pay.
Right.
This last session, though, the legislature added a net tax increase, and that's to help offset a business personal property tax exemption that was part of the compromise of the big hospital fee bill. So
Wow.
that was the one, I think, deviation from kind of keeping it self-contained to the impact of marijuana legalization. And we also added some money into school funding, kind of honoring that initial idea of put it towards education purposes.
But also, every dollar that's not spent by a school district on construction, but rather is funded by part of this 281, can go into operations.
Correct. And
although it's not directly impacting, it probably has a fairly direct impact.
I think the construction dollars have really helped with repairs and lagging items.
Right.
And the operational dollars, the little bit that we've been able to add on, obviously those help. But, I like to say, there isn't enough sin kind of to run the government on with the sin tax. So it's a meaningful amount of money, but it's not going to solve problems, in education.
Can't solve everything.
More sin in Colorado.
No,
no.
There isn't enough to tax to run the government.
Okay. I just want to talk about those two issues. Vital for Colorado is focused on energy. Let's shift our discussion to the Colorado Energy Office. And I have a sense what it is, but perhaps you could explain what it is. And there are some funding issues, I think, with regard to that particular department.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. The current incarnation of the Energy Office started in 2012. There was an agreement, and that was during a period where we had a split legislature, for example.
Yeah.
And so as we tried to keep the Energy Office going, the agreement widened, and the portfolio and the mission of the Energy Office changed to that term you've heard a lot of time called all of the above energy strategy.
Right.
The impression was the prior administration was too focused on renewables, green energy, and so forth, and the political environment wanted to see the entire energy spectrum advocated for through the Energy Office. That portfolio had a 5-year funding stream, and the 5-year funding stream ended this July. But all the duties of the office stayed in the statute. So as we tried to get this year's funding agreed to, the agreement on how far to go, either traditional fuels versus renewable fuels, there just wasn't a handshake to get it done this session. So what we're doing now is the office is operating off of a federal grant, and that grant kind of keeps it mostly in the green area, renewable area. In our budget request, we've asked for the replacement of all the money so that we can go back to an all of the above portfolio.
Just real quickly, what kind of impact on the people that used to work at this office? Has there been a reduction of personnel?
As you can imagine, quite stressful to know that the funding's over and it hinges on a political agreement. So there were some departures. We tried to manage it through some attrition as well. But the federal grant has allowed a number of the people to stay employed. And so we hope to keep this conversation going and find a path forward where we can go back to the program we had, just a year ago.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Henry Sobanet, Director of the Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting. We're having a conversation with Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado. We will be back with more to continue this conversation right after this break. Stay with us. You're listening to Connect and Collaborate. Thanks again for staying along with us today as we connect with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, we're so glad to have you with us today, and your guest, Henry Sobanet from the Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting.
Well, thanks a lot. And the category of shameless self-promotion for those who are interested more in Vital for Colorado,
Right.
you can go to our website, which is Vital for Colorado spelled out. So VITALFOR Colorado.com. And we advocate for energy policy. We have our budget director, our state's budget director, and I feel, Henry, that you've always been the state's budget director, but I know you haven't.
It feels that way.
But you've always been our state budget director. There are some technologies, I think, that are coming that may not solve everything, but may change things, may change a lot of assumptions. It's one of my pet peeves of people that look at economic models and they think of things in static things, and they make static arguments and don't realize that innovation can change things. So what I'm thinking about really would be autonomous cars. And everybody's talking about them and the Internet of Things and cars becoming together and becoming packs and sensing each other and going down the road. Has a state thought about these impacts and what it might do to some of our problems with CDOT in the roads?
Yes, and I'll try and do my best, and I'll say enough of the buzzwords to sound competent. I'm not an expert on intelligent transportation, but...
And I know I'm asking something a little bit outside your area, but it does affect the budget, I think, in the future.
Sure. I think some of the transformations that are happening in transportation are disruptive. Ride sharing is a good example. That's having all kinds of effects. It's giving new opportunities for work. It's also created, I think, incredible mobility options for elderly people. I also think it changes how you can choose to work and live and where you work and live. And so I think that's one example. At our Department of Transportation, the general project of all this innovative type stuff is called Road X, the word road and then the letter X.
Right.
And our director is leaving to go be a national advocate for this innovation in Washington, D.C., Shaylin Bhatt. He's been a big proponent of the potential for this future. And I think I'm more like a regular person trying to understand, can someone hack the car? Will I be safe? Will I get to work on time? What's it going to be like to just be in a car that just moves without you doing anything? So I think I'm still in the phase of understanding it just for myself. But as you start to think about the impact of a coordinated system, maybe you don't need as much capacity in certain areas as you did, and then you can maybe focus on the quality of the pavement smoothness. We're falling behind on regular maintenance as it is, and then capacity on top of it. So if the modeling and if the understanding of the future can materialize, the decisions around that stuff can be in that context. And so you could then say, what do you need for transit? What do you need for capacity? What do you need for maintenance? Given that might happen. You could also set it up to say, well, what if it takes too long? What do we need to do no matter what to get ready?
Right.
And so I think the prospect of the innovation is something to keep in mind, because when you look backward, humans have always figured out a way out of the conundrum that they're in. And so what hasn't always happened is you can't predict how quickly.
I think nobody really knows, but it just seems to me that the innovation's coming faster than people thought even 6 months ago. And the prospect is that some of these missing dollars that need to be filled in through stopgap measures and all these other kind of efforts under a world in which we're only have 18% discretionary spending anyway.
That's in our general fund. Yep.
Could be shifted from building more capacity to sorely needed maintenance. That's the shift that I see.
It's an interesting shift, and I think we're still dealing with a financing system that's basically 50s or 60s model, registration fees, gas tax. So the modernization of the financing of transportation needs to line up with the prospect of the technological progress.
So another just very, very broad topic. I think when I came to Colorado in 1978, the population of the state was something like 2.4 million people. And it has to be over 5.25, 5.3 now. So it's more than doubled since 78. And the whole issue of migration is very controversial, but from an economist's point of view, what studies has the state of Colorado done, and what do you see in terms of in-migration or people come to the state, growth, and what that does to the budget?
Yeah. We've lately been having about 60,000 people net in migration, so all the people moving in versus all the people moving out. And around 90,000 total population growth, births minus deaths. So Colorado's a growing state, and we also know that it's not, everywhere in the state is benefiting from this economic recovery.
Right.
We've been trying to focus on, we look for bubbles. You kind of fight the last war when you're forecasting. And so the last recession was a bubble formed, and it popped, and it caused the Great Recession. So we're trying to understand that. We're trying to understand affordability issues. The other members of our team are looking at other things. The statewide water plan is an example of what's the 30-year need for water infrastructure in Colorado. The transportation space, this has been a continuing discussion, and we're going to have another round of it this year. So a great line from Shaylin Batt, the CDOT director. We have a highway network designed in the 60s and 70s for the population of the 1980s. Wow. And so the impact, if people who are listening to the program are experiencing the impact of growth, yeah, so is everybody. It's more crowded, more people are here. And this has been kind of one of the cycles Colorado's known for, some real up years and then some up and down. But the diversification of our economy is really the story of the last 5 to 7 years, I think, because this oil and gas downturn, which I'm sure you know all too well about, and your members, the last time something of that magnitude happened, it caused a recession in the whole state. The most recent one happened, net in-migration still increased, population still increased, tax revenue slowed down but still grew, and overall employment was still positive. So our diversification is much different. We're more resilient, but I think this growth issue is front and center for the next meaningful period of time.
Is Colorado one of the largest growing states in terms of percentage in migration?
I think on a percentage basis, because we're not as big as some of the popular states, but yes, we're still one of the popular states, and now we're starting to see affordability become an issue for people moving here, and so there's just these trade-offs, ups and down.
And I think there was a question. This might have come from Governor Hickenlooper, or maybe it was somebody else in the state government, was talking about traffic as being one of the greater constraints on the future economics of the state. I mean, something we really ought to worry about, which gets back to possible solutions with autonomous cars and things.
I agree.
Was that Governor Hickenlooper?
I've heard that kind of comment, and it may have been the governor, but here's the way to think about that issue. We have a lot in the service economy now versus 50 years ago. And a service economy is basically buying and selling time from each other. And a lot of that is physically moving to a place where you sell somebody your time. Plumber, landscaper, whatever the service might be. The lawyer. The delivery may have to travel. So to the extent it can travel on the internet, traffic isn't that much of a problem. But if you think about services being conducted through the highway system and goods being delivered, especially now with so much online purchasing, the highway infrastructure starts to become the place things happen more quickly or not. And there's definitely an economic correlation here with this infrastructure issue.
Well, I think in our last minute or so, I guess give you an opportunity to, you've talked about these business principles coming to the state budget office, and things are really improving. What can we look forward in the future? I apologize for just giving you 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think in the future, obviously we have the term limited administration issue coming up. And so what we're trying to do is demonstrate that the programs that have been started are really worth keeping. We've had amazing support from the legislature for these programs. And we just kicked off our 5th Academy for state leaders. And this one was focused on the upper levels of the departments, the deputy director level. So for the future, I think this program will continue because I think it's popular with legislators and with state employees, and it's of value to the public.
Thank you, Henry Sobanet.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much for both of you for being here, Peter Moore and Henry Sobanet. And thank you for listening to Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. Have a nice weekend.